All right, let's actually do something with our service object. I think that sounds like a lot of fun. We're going to go ahead and start by making a method, which will help us out. We're going to make a method that's called Query for Quotes. Query for Quotes receives no parameters, so it's a very simple little function. And what it's going to do, I'll just kind of tell you the main points, is it's going to make a query object, and then it's going to use the service to execute the query, and then it's going to use a callback block to handle the response. So that's kind of the main goal. We're going to make a query, we're going to say, hey, service, deal with it, and then we're going to use a callback block, which you may not have seen before, but they're pretty straightforward, to handle the response. And that's so that we're not blocking until the response comes back. It makes it a good way to avoid blocking. So what we're going to do first, we're going to create a Gtl query for something related to MovieQuotes. I'm just going to call this object query. And the way that we're going to make it is we're going to say Gtl query MovieQuotes. We're going to start by typing the word query and just see what our options are. So our options are something with delete, something with insert, something with list. We obviously want the one for list, right? So we've made our query. That was pretty exciting. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use our service. So we're going to say self.service. So if it didn't create, it gets created. And we're going to say execute query. The query that we're going to execute is the one we just made, so query. And then our completion handler is a callback block. And so the way I typically recommend you do these is you click in here and you can hit enter, and then it'll just kind of type all that stuff, right? So it types it writes ticket, and then it says ID object, and it gives you an error. ID object is like a generic thing for who knows what's going to come back. I happen to know that what's going to come back is a Gtl MovieQuotes collection, which I'll just call response. You totally could just leave it with an ID and an object, but I happen to know what's going to come back, and so I go ahead and say that it's that type. The first thing you want to do when you get one of these back is you want to check the error. So you want to say if error is not nil. So if the error is not nil, we want to do something. And specifically what we want to do is we want to show the error dialog with that error. So if there was an error, then abandon ship, show that message. You can actually, it's up to you. You can, most of the time, you can just return after this, right? Because you don't want to do anything else. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and reload the table even if there was an error. And the reason I do that is a detail for how the rest of the app works. I want to reload the table even in the event of an error. Assuming there's not an error, so it actually worked, we probably ought to look at the response. That would be a good thing. And all we really need to do is we need to set the response equal to the quotes. Response dot items. So the response has a couple things in it, but response.items is the most important one. You'll notice that it's throwing a flag here saying that, hey, you just assigned an array to a mutable array. All right, I can fix that. So don't assign items, assign a mutable copy of the items. And that's just because quotes are mutable and the items were immutable. So we just made a mutable copy. That's easy enough. All right, so made a function. Making functions are good. What's even more important than making functions is calling them, so we need to call it from somewhere. By the way, we'll add some more stuff to make this a little more complex. But for now, I just wanted to keep it simple. If you come up to your view will appear area, you can see there's all kinds of to-dos. There's a to-do to delete this line. That one's easy. And then, presumably, if we didn't want the other line, we'll say initial query complete no. To do query the back end. I can do that, query for the back end. And then I happen to know that my query, it's going to reload the table regardless when it finishes. So I'm just going to take off this reload. and I'm just going to do one reload when it finishes the query. So now when the view appears, it's going to do the query for quotes. So to be honest, there's a chance that something will happen now. So let's go ahead and give it a whirl. So if you run it, it should pop up your simulator. And sure enough, mine pops in with a bunch of quotes. I'm going to make an offer you can't refuse. I'll be back. This is cool. These are good things. Let's go ahead and see if this matches. It obviously should with what is on my site. And sure enough, you can see that they do match, but the order is random, right? So I mean, they're all the same quotes, but there's no ordering to it yet. So I mean, a pretty big step, right? So I mean, we can actually pull things from the web. This is huge. And if you're having problems, this is like the number one place that things can go wrong. One thing that some people do is if you didn't set the host name correctly, like on your backend, this will be pointing to the wrong place. So like if you go into this, I'm in the service MovieQuotes, that's one thing to check. Make sure you're pointing to the right RPC URL. And speaking of that, we could also go ahead and do the test for localhost now. So if we instead say localhost yes, and I make sure that my localhost is actually running, yep, it appears to be running. I can actually come in here and see like what's some of my data in localhost. I'll just type in another one, localhost quote, hello video people. So not a very good movie title, but I think you get the idea. And now if I run it again with localhost, you can see it says, hello video people, which I think that's just kind of cool that you can go to localhost or you can go somewhere else. The next thing I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of make it a little bit better on this quote. So some of the problems that we've got, I mean, there's all kinds of problems. There's no order. That's an obvious big one. If there are no quotes, it's unclear if it worked or not. I could go ahead and do that test real quick. So if there are no quotes, so this is a great test for localhost. So if I wanted to go into localhost and just make it to where there's no data, I could just select them all and delete them. So I just blew away all of my data in localhost. And you can see that if you were to run it now, there's no data on localhost, so it just says finding movies. It finished. There just weren't any. But you can see that there should probably be a different message there. So it's a little thing we could try to fix. There's also no indication of something happening. Usually there's like a network indicator at the top. We could fix that. There's a limit that we're only getting 10 quotes. You may not even know that, but that's the default size. You only get 10 quotes. And then things we'll do in later videos. There's no way to refresh, create, edit, or delete. So what we're going to do is we're going to selectively add some things to our function just to make it a little bit better. I'll go ahead and do those with you. So we're going to go down to our function. And we're going to add little things to make it better. So the first thing I'm going to add is that initial query complete. We're just going to say yes. And so now, so before it just looks like it's running forever. But if I add that little line, once it's done, it actually says no movie quotes found. And you can look to see how I set that up in the table. All right, so there was one thing that's done. Next thing we want to do is we'd like to set a order. And for the order, what we're going to use is just last touch date time. And I'm going to go ahead and point back to production. So I'm going to say localhost testing no. Of course, I left off my @ symbol. Probably cares about that. And so now if I run it, it should actually be in the same order as my web interface. Which is kind of neat. If I go look at the web interface and I look at this, I can see that the order is the same. So there we fixed the order. The size being only 30, that one's a little bit trickier. So one thing you can do is you can set it a little higher. So you can set it to 30. You can actually go all the way up to 50. But to be honest, you can't go to the moon, right? the way you get more quotes, like if you've got hundreds, is you have to grab them in batches, right? And those batches, you grab, however many. Right now I'm catching batches of 30. And then if you want more batches, you have to look to see if there's a page token. So if I say, hey, response, next page token, if it's not nil, then it must mean there's more data on the server. And so we're not going to deal with this now. We'll just print out a little log that says there is more data available. Use %at to get it. So if you did want to get more data, you'd have to make a query, and you'd have to set on it, like next time, you'd have to say query.page_token equals, and you'd have to set up a function that received a parameter. We're not going to deal with it in this example, but just to kind of mention, there is that limit of we're only grabbing a small batch, and that's kind of a limitation that we're doing. So you won't really see anything on this change because we don't have a lot of data. But if you did have a lot of data, you would now be getting more of it. I could go make enough quotes to show you that the limit works, but you can try it if you'd like as well. The other thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to show that something's happening. We're going to do that with a network indicator. So the way that works is you say UI application, shared application, set network activity indicator visible. So we're going to set it yes before we do the query. And then once the query completes, so like inside our callback block, we're going to set it to no. So that way it will be on while the query is happening. So that's just a little indicator. So it says, hey, we're doing activity. It's because a query is about to happen. And then inside this block, it will turn it off. So if we run it now, your eyes will have to be fast and good. You can see it was actually spinning, and then it went away. My internet is pretty fast here, so you didn't really see it for long, but you can see that it did spin for a little while there. All right, so that's enough for queries. We're going to do a little bit more in the next video to make them better, but I mean you've done the tremendous first step, and that is to talk to the world outside of your app. All right, see you next time. Bye.